Greetings, and welcome back to the Rose Bros podcast. This episode, we are joined by Mr. Ian Dundas, President and CEO of Enerplus Corporation, a Calgary-based energy company that trades on both the Toronto Stock Exchange and the New York Stock Exchange, with a market cap of approximately $5 billion and $3.7 billion, respectively. Enerplus currently produces approximately 100,000 BOE a day from its USA properties in North Dakota and Pennsylvania. Mr. Dundas became President and Chief Executive Officer of Enerplus on July 1st, 2013, and prior to joining Enerplus, held several executive positions in the merchant banking business, where he helped oil and gas companies grow by accessing the funding and expertise they required. Mr. Dundas is a member of the Business Council of Canada and of the Board of Governors of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. He's been an active volunteer in numerous charitable endeavors and is currently a committee member of the YMCA Fund Development Committee and previously the co-chair of the YMCA Power Up Potential Campaign Committee. Mr. Dundas holds a Bachelor of Commerce degree with distinction from the University of Calgary and a Bachelor of Laws with distinction from the University of Alberta. He was also called to the Alberta Bar in 1995. Among other things, we discussed the importance of full-cycle returns, turning a dollar into $1.30, the future of Enerplus, and why to avoid debt. Enjoy. This podcast episode is sponsored by Conate Water Solutions. Do you need cost-effective water sourcing options to supply your next drilling or completions program? Conate Water Solutions is a specialized hydrogeology company focused on water well drilling, testing, and water management services in Western Canada and Texas. Contact info@conatewater.com or check out conatewater.com for more details. This episode is brought to you by Canada Action, whose aim is to promote the importance of Canada's energy industry, which is the bedrock of our nation's economy, providing hundreds of thousands of jobs and economic opportunities across the country. Learn more at canadaaction.ca or check out Canada Action on social media. This podcast is sponsored by headracingcanada.com. Looking for high-performance ski gear this winter? In partnership with four-time Olympian Manny Osborne Parody, headracingcanada.com is offering the lowest prices possible through its online storefront by passing brick-and-mortar savings on to customers. Check out headracingcanada.com for more info and get your high-performance ski gear for the upcoming season. Good morning, Mr. Ian Dundas.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, you're very welcome. Look forward to it.
I really appreciate your time. I know it's valuable. There's a direct correlation on the willingness of successful and busy people that are willing to do this. It seems like a lot of the people that are seemingly the most busiest are the easiest ones to get a hold of. So I really appreciate it. A couple emails is all it took. So thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Maybe on that, just for a moment, as I think about my career and how I spend time on things, I view things like this part and parcel of energy advocacy, and what you do is part of talking to people about the business, and it's so important. And 10 years ago, didn't understand that to the same extent. So I see a lot of my colleagues view this as really strategically important, and so we carve out time for it. So yeah, I'm excited to be here.
Neil Rizal, Brett Wilson, kind of the same. There's correlation
for sure. Yeah, and Brett probably started it earlier. And you look at guys like Mike Rose, I've just a lot of time for. Mike's been leaning into it for a long time, very publicly. And so, the rest of us are trying to do our part.
Maybe just to start from the top for anyone that is listening to this, you are the CEO of Enerplus, but what is Enerplus Energy?
Yeah, Enerplus, we're if I talk to my mom, I say we're an intermediate company. If I talk to analysts, they know we're sort of a mid cap. So we are a pretty simple oil and gas company. The history of the business, we've been a public company for 36 years. It was the mid-'80s. I've actually been here quite a long time. We would have been the original royalty trust, for those that remember those days. Started by a visionary out of Montreal, Marcel Tremblay, and his vision was royalty trust and distributions, and there was money to be made in the retail space, linking it with oil and gas. Over time, that evolved. Today, all of our assets are actually in the United States. We would have at one point produced 100,000 plus BOE a day out of Canada. We're now back to that same number, but it's all out of the United States and mostly focused it's all focused in shale, mostly in North Dakota. We have a some assets in Pennsylvania. Head office is out of Calgary. And so, we're sort of middle of the pack size up here. If you sort of look at some of our competitors in the US, we're on the smaller side at sort of a $4 or $5 billion company.
Do you ever meet Marcel Tremblay?
Marcel interviewed me 23 years ago. I had sort of gone through a process. I was looking for the position of Vice President of Business Development at Enerplus at the time, and we met at the Petroleum Club. At that point, he had just sold. The governance back then was very different than today. Today, governance in public companies is pretty straightforward. There it was a little more complex. So Marcel had a management company. He didn't actually have Enerplus. He had a management company, and he had sold that to some U.S. capital company called El Paso, and they had some private equity there. Anyway, so I had gone through the process and met Marcel at the Petroleum Club. He had just sold and was sort of ready for the next phase of Enerplus, and we had a nice luncheon. And unfortunately, he passed pretty quickly thereafter. But his son, Eric, stayed with the company for quite a while, so there was a Tremblay connection for a while. Mr.
John Brewster did the podcast and said Marcel was one of the most interesting people he ever worked for, maybe the originator of the trust idea.
He for sure was. I think John Brewster was around some of the planning of it too, and I think a few people were very important in that. But yeah, Marcel was ground zero in 1986 out of Montreal, and for a while, it was so successful, that model, it actually distorted the Canadian capital markets. Federal government had to step in, and living it at the time, we think they made a mistake relative to how they went about it, specific to oil and gas and energy specifically. But it was a phenomena that had some legs for sure.
Just to get a bit of background, you were a lawyer by training, I think.
Yeah, I only typically tell my mom that. Yeah, so I grew up around the business. My family was involved in a long time and did an undergrad degree in commerce. The plan was to eventually get into business. Wasn't really ready for the growing up world, so I went to law school, practiced for a little while, but it was a pretty short period of time. So it's been energy, finance, business, and then with this company for quite a long time.
Coming out of law school, you probably had a lot of options. How come you decided on energy? Why the sector?
Yeah, why did I decide? I don't know that I was all that planful, to be honest. My father, Joe, still around and doing well. He was CEO of several oil companies. And so that might sound like it was, sort of some preordained thing, but it actually felt like the opposite. Like dad is an engineer's engineer out of Imperial Oil, and he loves his boy. So he denies he says this, but he had said, if you're not an engineer, you will not be the CEO of an oil and gas company. Maybe it was true. And it was the mid 80s and it was the NEP, and, dad was front and center in all of that. And, there was sort of no money in oil and gas, and it was a dead business. And so that's partly why I didn't go into engineering. But, as I sort of started working here, and you saw all the relationships and the opportunities, all the opportunities I saw were energy related. And, as you came through the early 90s, the junior oil market was picking up, and there was some energy around it, as it were. One thing led to another, and I really loved it. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed it. Maybe we'll get into it a little bit, but it's had some ebbs and flows and this and that over time. So it hasn't been a straight line by any stretch of the imagination, but yeah, I've loved being around it. And honestly, once I got into it, the whole sunset industry thing, it wasn't in my mind. Even at times when, that was the party line. I just saw the future in this, and it's been fun, and it's been a great experience for me.
Fast forward to today. Like we said, you're the CEO of Enerplus. To bleed if your investors bleed, to create skin in the game, create a symmetry of risk. Have you had to invest your own money in the company? Yeah,
I probably put, been here a long time. On one hand, it feels like the founder, and my fingerprints are around a lot of this company, but I'm not. I've been an employee the whole time. So there's been moments where I put money in, didn't put money to start it. It was a $10 billion company, and day one, I bought 500 shares. We still own those 500 shares. They were worth a lot more than I bought for a while, and then they were worth a lot less than I bought. Over the last several years, certainly as we went through the pandemic, we really felt people weren't appreciating what was going on in this business, not just ours, but the industry broadly. And so, yeah, I was able to invest quite a bit more over that time period, which has worked out pretty well.
Last week on BNN, Eric Nuttall, August 23rd, 2023, commented that you were excellent at capital allocation. That was his comment when somebody asked about Enerplus. As a lawyer by training, kind of not technical, so to speak, would you consider that one of your main skill sets?
I think we've made some pretty good calls. Yeah, I think we've made some pretty good calls. Capital allocation gets a lot of that profile and gets a lot of the attention. So it's worked out pretty well for us. And yeah, I've had a pretty strong role to play in it for sure.
In terms of M&A and capital allocation, Enerplus has been really good at. And so what makes the decision process different at Enerplus? What do you think separates you?
I think there are a lot of companies that you could say the same thing to. Mike Rose has done an exceptional job, and you can go through the list on both sides of the border, but not everyone's done it. So as you look at the commonalities there, I think there's a few things. What we have focused on is creating the conditions that allowed us to buy. So we can talk about debt and balance sheet and those things. I mean, there would have been quite a few people in the bottom of the pandemic who wanted to buy and they couldn't. So we did. There was another piece, and not everyone would have been in this camp. This would have been a bit of a differentiator. You know, for the last 15 years, one of the things that was absolutely front and center for us and, you know, and for me, as I was leading business development, was ensuring we were grounded on returns. So you're going to allocate capital. Let's talk about returns. You know, it sounds like a really simple, trite thing to say, and it's certainly where the business is right now. That hasn't always been the case. It's like, I'll give you an example. You know, Enerplus in 2003, 2004, our cost of capital was exceptional. You know, we could have bought a toaster, issued equity, and it would have been accretive. Yeah. And some were doing it because there was a lot of money around it. And we just couldn't get our heads around that because certainly in Canada, because everyone had that cost of capital advantage and it was really hard to buy. You know, and the price of oil wasn't that high. It was in the 30s before. Like, that wasn't the driver. It was just the value of assets. You know, and we didn't have a vision that oil was going $100 a barrel. So that actually took us out of Canada. Like, it was almost the opposite at this moment, where the Canadian assets at that point were the most expensive in the world. They're too expensive, actually. You know, and so, you know, for us, we've kept it pretty simple. Focus on returns, focus on the financing, allow yourself to do it. And, you know, maybe another part of it, honestly, was we had a great team and we brought our board along with us through all of those places. So, you know, on some levels, you know, we wouldn't show up with a, hey, we're in the middle of the pandemic and we want to buy, and we've never talked about it before. People were pretty strategic aligned. So, yeah, it's worked out pretty well for us.
How do you sharpen your capital allocation skills, or how did you develop a sense for the importance of that attribute? Would you read Berkshire Hathaway reports? Do you study other investors? How do you think?
Yeah, some of that. Yeah, for sure. You know, I'll come back to my dad. His nickname with some of his, so like he ran these intermediate companies. Personally, he was so conservative that his buddies called him GIC Joe. Now, I don't think it's not quite as heroic when GICs are 16 or 17%, right? But it was about, I think I have a reasonably good sense of risk. You know, maybe I do better in down markets than up markets. Maybe. I don't know if that's totally true, but, you know, I had a feel for it, and like, it's not very complicated in a lot of respects. Maybe you can think a little longer term, a little bit, you know, and if your company allows you to think a little bit longer term and you've got that horizon. So, you know, for me, actually, where I felt uncomfortable, actually, Calgary in the 90s, first real job, outside of law, like, you know, first real job, went to this little company called Enron, but it was the good Enron. It was Enron in Canada. And I was working for a fellow, who again became an exceptionally important mentor in my life, Kyle Kitagawa. Kyle gave me opportunities, and Kyle was a good investor. That early imprinting was really, really important, you know. And so I was a commercial guy, which is true. You know, I had a sense for the technical from Dad, so, you know, didn't have it entirely. And, so, you know, Enron was not, we didn't have an operating business, but Kyle recognized the importance, or in fact, the entire Enron team recognized the importance of bringing technical capability to bear, but before a lot of people did on the investing side, actually. And so we had a multidisciplinary team. And, you know, on one hand, and this is where Dad, I think, was sort of wrong, and maybe he was right at the time, where the businesses was simpler. You know, today it's so multifaceted. So if you don't have a technical grounding as part of the decision-making process, you're in dangerous territory. I think, but it's more than that. And you've actually seen a lot of examples of engineers who become a little too myopic, a little too linear, and can't multitask and bring to bear. So, you look around the business now, and I think you can see lots of different leadership groups, strong technical, or you're going to fail, and I think an engineer or a technical person running it who can bring other things to bear is probably the best. But you can see lots of examples where that hasn't been the case. So, yeah, and it's been lots of years and lots of practice, and not everything worked out. So learn from a few of those as well.
Perhaps like Mike Rose at Tourmaline or Neil Rizal at Headwater, balancing the technical with the capital allocation seems to bear the most fruit.
For sure. But there really are some good examples of non-technical leaders who have exceptionally strong technical people alongside them, and it's worked out really quite well. In some respects, the larger the company gets, maybe the less important some of the technical can be at the senior levels. You really need to balance all factors in these decisions. It really is multidisciplinary to the extreme. I had a moment. So most of my career here it's been, I guess, 3 phases. There's been the last 11 years as CEO. There was the first 10 where I was business development, and they started getting more and more and more. And then I had a stint as the chief operating officer. And when I was offered that before it was public, I can remember thinking, I'm absolutely convinced I can do this. But, I wonder what my engineer buddy is going to say, or CEOs who I really respect. And I actually had a coffee with Derek Evans at the time. I have a lot of time for, and he was sort of like one of the Renaissance engineers, the Clayton crew, all of these people. And in my mind, I knew exactly what we needed to do. We needed to streamline the organization. We had a good capital allocation process. We needed to sell the little stuff, and all these, it was pretty straightforward. And we were at a size, right, the people to do that. And then we just needed a framework and some accountabilities to sort of maybe take us to the next level. 1 minute into the coffee with Derek, I sort of asked his advice. He's, yep, got it. You can do it for sure. Because maybe that wouldn't have been the right answer at a smaller company. I don't know. But where we were in our evolution, he gave me a lot of confidence to sort of go down that path. It's worked out pretty well. I only did it for 2 years, so it's probably a good thing.
Charlie Munger would suggest success in life is oftentimes what you avoid rather than what you do. Have you thought about your strategy in terms of avoiding certain things, and like maybe avoiding debt, for a basic example?
Yeah, I mean, that would probably be the single biggest thing. Yeah. Like we've avoided things that would have worked out very well for us too. Haven't bit every apple.
Things you didn't buy.
Lots of things we didn't buy. From an Enerplus perspective, the worst deal we ever did was one of the bigger ones. We bought a natural gas company here, and it wasn't that it was so terrible. It was just value. It was priced for really strong gas prices without a lot of margin in it, and those sorts of things. But we managed the balance sheet, so we got we did get through it. No regrets personally. Nothing I'm willing to share. So.
When pursuing an M&A strategy, in your opinion, what's the best catalyst to pick up good deals? Is it the bottom of the cycle? Is it once in a century pandemic? Is it distressed sellers? How do you go about that? Is there without giving away your secrets?
I'll put a little meat on the bone, but I'll start by saying it needs to make sense. What makes sense? Like your financing strategy needs to make sense. It needs to make sense to your shareholders. So I often think, like, we weren't the only one to put money out at the bottom of the cycle, but we're one of quite a limited number. One of the reasons it's worked out so well for our shareholders was we didn't put many shares out at the bottom of the cycle, right? So you have to have a holistic approach. I think if you overcomplicate it, you've probably overcomplicated it. What my former chair, I was so fortunate. My first rookie CEO, don't know very much. And I ended up with a chair, Elliot Pugh, who is just an exceptional oil and gas person. We're really, really, really fortunate. And when we talked about returns and economics, Elliot would just keep saying, if you can turn $1 into $1.30 on a discounted basis, it'll be good. But, thinking about, we've got, here's an M&A transaction or a merger, like whatever you're looking at, always at least somewhere in there having the lens of returns has been really important. So there's no question that it's a lot easier to make money buying low and selling high. In our business, where it's cyclic, the commodity is cyclic, beyond just the capital markets and all that stuff, that's important for for sure. Some of the best trades were when we sold things, and having the confidence to be wrong when you sold something. I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. We sold some really good things that we were convinced didn't fit our strategy. I don't think you only need generational distressed markets to make money. That's easier on some levels, but I'll tell you, we were convinced of what we wanted to do. We know we needed to do it to build out our inventory, but there was a lot of people who weren't talking no-brainer stuff at that moment in time. So emotionally, it can be a lot easier to buy in markets like this, even though we're now at $80 oil and coming off of the bottoms. So yeah, I don't think there's a one size fits all thing. If you got to think about risk management. So if you're going to use a lot of debt, in my opinion, you should de-risk some of that with some hedging tools. If you're using all equity, it sure better make sense for your existing shareholders on a full cycle basis, not just a near term basis. And that's maybe I'll finish with this point. One of the tricks has been to balance the next quarter, first quarter post deal, first press release with full cycle returns, call it a 5-year period, like whatever you want to talk to. And they don't always go hand glove, right? And in fact, in the last 4 or 5 years, they've almost disconnected. It's all bit about the instantaneous. I think we're heading into a market that's going to be a little more sanguine, a little more balanced. I think if you wanted to lean into something that really looked dilutive near term, you better be the right team to do that in the right moment. So I think that'll be hard for a lot of companies, maybe most. But
speaking of the things you didn't buy, the fans of Enerplus would be curious on Crescent Point. Not sure if you talked about that, but if you can.
Their recent North Dakota sale, I have almost perfectly avoided talking about specific transactions over the last 20 years. But I can talk because I think it'd be weird not to. We would talk to our shareholders this way. When people ask us how we think about North Dakota, we think about our portfolio. I can talk about it a little bit that way. So as we think about transactions, our company it's as simple as it's been in 25 years. We have a large operating footprint in North Dakota. That's where we spend all of our operated capital. And we've got a non-operated little ATM that sits out in Pennsylvania where checks just keep coming our way. That's operated by Chesapeake. Does a very good job out there. So for us, if we had met in 2019, and you're talking about the company, you'd feel pretty good about our track record and you'd like the Bakken and you'd like quite a bit of things, love what you're doing. You'd wonder about our inventory. And we still have lots in front of us, but we hadn't bought anything in scale in North Dakota since 2012. And we were fortunate. What we bought ended up being just continued to get better and better and better and better. We had second zones. And so we never had issues with inventory. And then it became clear, we could maybe buy some stuff, but it was so expensive. The Permian was taking off and the Bakken was cheaper. Well, the Permian's got thousands of feet of pay and dozens of zones, and we had 2 and 45 feet of pay. And so even though it looked cheaper per acre, it was expensive. Right? And so your issue at that moment would have been inventory. Pandemic hits, everything goes on sale, uniquely on sale, and we're able to put $750 million out the door US, and we, dramatically bolstered our inventory without almost having to pay for upside. Like it was always easy to get inventory, but just if you're paying $5 million for an undrilled well, okay, tell me how you're going to make money. Yeah, maybe it's harder, right? And so that brings us to your question. We've never had a portfolio that looked quite like this. We have 10 years plus of inventory in North Dakota. It's almost an embarrassment of riches down there. And so when we think about adding to it, and you're talking about the Crescent Point asset, it was a bit smaller, less inventory. It would fit on some levels, or assets like that would fit on some levels. How do these things fit into your operating plan? Oh, yeah, it would fit okay. And then you've got to really be honest with yourself. Well, if it's not adding to your inventory, it's detracting from your inventory. Oh, one of the things that's awesome right now in the space is the sustainability of these businesses. They're being run like businesses. Right. You're thinking not about next quarter exclusively. And we're trying to generate free cash flow, and we're generating free cash flow. And so the mechanism or key mechanism to enable that to continue is you've got the right amount of inventory. Right. And so, we're acutely aware of this business is working really well. So if we're going to put an asset into it, it really has to work, mathematically work. We want it to complement the amount of free cash flow we're generating. You'd like it to complement the inventory. If it doesn't complement the inventory, you sure need to get it at a price where that still makes some sense. And so we're really interested in buying more in North Dakota. You can see strong correlations to larger companies and valuations. We're almost debt free, so we can cut a check and it's easy peasy. It's maybe not 3% interest rates now, but it's still easy peasy. But, there's others out there. If you're not invested, if we bring something into our portfolio, it might displace something else, or it competes with a share buyback where we're buying more of our own wells. And so we're in a great place to be really aggressive in North Dakota, but we don't need to be right now. So
another question from the fans of Enerplus might be, during the pandemic was a tough time and you guys actually made a creative moves, but the question now would be, where does Enerplus go from here in an M&A strategy? It's kind of hard to lay out exactly what you're going to do, but where do we go from here?
The original strategy we employed 10 years ago was just to create a really good oil and gas company and mostly focused in the Bakken. Mm-hmm. Like there were moments where we always wanted to just build more scale in the Bakken. There were moments that we can't, it's just so expensive. We might have to do something else, but we didn't really want to. And we've been successful in that. And with the inventory we've captured to date, the valuation of the company, optionality embedded in the asset base, all those sorts of things, I think that's going to continue. That strategy can continue for quite a while and be successful. And I think we're going to make people money doing that. Do I think in 5 years, I don't know, choose some number that's not weird, we're going to look the same with the same asset base in North Dakota and be independent? I don't think that's very likely. And that's not some Enerplus just put up a for sale sign message. I think it's just obvious. We've got this business out there in this industry. Everyone's thinking about consolidation and scale. We have depleting assets. We've got this, I just don't think it's likely, right? So what changes? Would love to buy more things in North Dakota. Would love it. There are 8 companies who produce 80% of the oil there. And every one of those CEOs really likes the assets. I don't know of any other, certainly in the U.S., I don't know of any other oil basins in the U.S., black oil basins in the U.S. that are as technically low risk. The Permian is awesome, but man, there's lots of hits and misses because of the nature of the opportunity set. It's hard to find a well in North Dakota that doesn't get your money back. So people like it. North Dakota is a regulatory state. The regulatory environment in the state is really supportive of oil and gas operations. People want you to be there. You've got lots of infrastructure in place. And so everyone likes it. It's a free cash machine, but there's no way those 8 companies are static for the next 5 years. People are going to be buying each other, and you can look through some of the larger ones and you can go, well, they got to do something. They got to get bigger or sell. And like a good example is Ovintiv. So Ovintiv, former Encana, obviously, they bought Newfield way back when, or a couple of years ago. And when they bought it, Newfield had a footprint in North Dakota that was sort of too small for Newfield. So we tried to buy that asset lots from Newfield, but you look at, I sort of like it, and maybe we weren't aggressive enough. And then Ovintiv does their deal. Okay, for sure they're going to sell it, and they don't, because it was not a good time in the market, and they're smart. I know we've only got 5 years of inventory or whatever the number was, but that's a lot of years away. Right? And so they waited for a moment where either someone was going to pay them a lot, and they did pretty well in the sale, but it was more they had a catalyst where they needed to. And so, I think the Bakken deals will trade in the Bakken. They will, but they'll be slower and there'll be reasons for them. So, Enerplus, I'd like to be part of that. I'd like to be buying that. Is there a chance at some point we're not successful in doing that and we see an opportunity somewhere else, with conditions that make sense for investors? We're sitting on cash, and you pay attention to those sorts of things. There's clearly a signal in the market that the larger companies are getting a valuation uplift. It's significant. And so people are paying attention to that, looking for ways to capture it. Easy to say, hard to do in a creative manner for your shareholders. without taking on a lot of risk.
Enerplus is a Canadian company. So a critic might suggest that going down in the States, the Americans have their trap lines, so to speak. How does Enerplus differentiate itself and compete with the local trappers?
The battlefield is strewn with bodies, right, on both sides of the border. Mm-hmm. Mostly that's happened. There have been some exceptions. I think we've proven we're an exception now. I think there was a lot of things that occurred there to make that happen. We went slow. So like 2005, and we did very little for the next 4 years. Under the category of things I regret, actually, we should have been more aggressive. But we had a strategy back then, and we were a trust, and we took some risk going down there, but we still had a mantra that we were waiting for the technical nut to be cracked, and once it was cracked, we would then go in. And we entered in Montana, which is where the Bakken started. But it took a while for us to figure out what was going to make the real prize work in North Dakota. And so, we finally did that. But over that time period, it gave us an opportunity to build local relationships, figure out the dynamic, which is maybe been the organizational key to create one company. So if you're trying to manage North Dakota, and for us back then it was all on reservation remotely without local people, like good luck with that. Right. So, we had conditions in place that allowed us to work our way through that. It wasn't a straight line. Like there was moments in 2012, North Dakota had a gold rush, $15 coffee cups. And there was moments like everyone's operational platform bent. Some broke actually. So it took us a while. And now we're making it work really, really quite well. Maybe the next time we do it, we'll be able to go a little bit faster with the things we've learned. But yeah, it's you got to be really, the border's different. Like the border is different, and North Dakota is not Texas, and Midland is different than the Delaware, and so and it's different operating up Dawson Creek. So
again, fans we're curious: is Enerplus going down to the States? Is it something you think about?
We already went down to the States. I think your question or their question is probably something about a head office, yes, maybe, or a domicile. Mm-hmm. Would I set it up this way with a complete white sheet of paper? Oh, no, I don't know. But when I think about the company right now, and I think about shareholders, you can parse it. Let's look at it in multiple ways. I don't see any opportunity to take the head office and move it down there that is going to make us more money. I think it's going to cost. We're deeply integrated right now. So you walk the halls, we're in Dome Tower in downtown Calgary, right? And you walk the halls, it's integrated. Our summer student program, we had 22 summer students across the company this year, just wrapped up actually. Several of the summer students here would report directly to leaders in the US, some in the field. So it works, right? The labor market is tight in both in Denver and in Calgary. It's tighter in Denver, so there's more opportunity here. We just hired, it's been over a year now, a vice president of people and culture. We looked globally, and we had more opportunity here. So we see. So I see a labor advantage here, and I see linkages to the capital markets and the Canadian industry that are strategically important for Enerplus. Like I'll give you an example. We've talked about these deals we did at the bottom of the market. One of them, we bought a company called Bruin for $450 million. We've got a lot of relationships on both sides of the border, to be clear. Shareholder base is sort of half American, half Canadian. American banks. So we got support everywhere, right? But, but in the US, we're a little bitty fish. And so we had this idea to buy this asset, and, we sort of went to got lots of support in the Canadian bank market, but RBC and BMO over the course of, I think every time I tell a story, I shorten it. But I think honestly, it was about 5 days. Over the course of 5 days, in the middle of the pandemic, they collectively underwrote a $400 million US term loan at sub 3%. That never would have happened in the US on that timetable. So I think we punch up a little bit here, and it's working. So if you think about, I don't know, like investment grade, So Enerplus is an investment grade, and we're, like I said, we're closing in on debt free. But I don't know, maybe we do a deal and we have a chance. Your stepping stone to investment grade in Canada is a smaller level than in the U.S. So I think these linkages are really shareholder centric for our shareholders. And then the final piece. So a lot of people would ask, well, yeah, but what about the Ovintiv situation and changing the nature of the company, or sort of the characterization of the company, to an American company? There would be one tangible benefit. That tangible benefit is, so just for people who aren't aware, we've traded on New York for 25, 30 years or whatever, like so lots of liquidity in both markets, all those good and wonderful things. We report in US dollars, it's US GAAP, so there's all the comparability. So the one thing out there is, if we changed our domicile or our head office, I guess, we could have more passive investing. Okay, that's interesting. So more US investors would be more indexed. Okay, that would be a positive thing. There would be an offset, which is we wouldn't be Canadian content for Canadian investors. Look into the market and look at the 20 companies in the US who sort of look like us. And if they're at a premium valuation, we might be having a different conversation, but they're not. In fact, we performed really well. We're top quartile in that connection. So I don't see the drivers, and I come back to dollars out the door, efficiencies, and is it working? Do I like the fact that as a Canadian and a Calgarian, we're here? I like that. I love that, but that would not be the factor. It wouldn't play into it if we didn't see the math there for our shareholders.
Nice thing about capital is that it's very mobile. It can be sort of like a Berkshire Hathaway in Omaha. You can be where you want.
Well, it's actually it's a really good example, because I think a lot of if you're a Calgarian, and you grew up around the oil business here, it's a bit of a foreign model. The assets are here, the people did it, but that's not like what the US looks like. And there's tons of companies run out of Oklahoma City that don't have a lot of mid-con assets anymore, because it's fungible and airplanes work and technology works. And so, I travel more than I would if I lived somewhere local. Our Canadian trade is CAP, and actually EPEC as well. So, when there's Canadian trade stuff, it's easier. You'd walk across the hall or people zoom in, right? Our US trade is AXPC. And so, we travel there 3 times a year. We try to get in front of people, and there's, the meetings move from DC to Denver to Oklahoma to Houston. And so people, everyone's doing it. So we're not unique in this.
Signal versus noise. The oil markets have a lot of noise in them. Everyone has their opinion, points to various data sets on what's going to happen, and everyone has their 2 cents. But do you find certain sources of data more valuable than others, or certain people? Do you listen to certain inputs more than others? How do you think of that in terms of M&A and your strategy in general?
I listen really carefully to what our team says. Garth Dahl's been our vice president of marketing for a long time. He's worked for our CFO, Jody Jensen, for 5 years now.
Maybe your dad.
Yeah, no, probably a little. Yeah, no, there's, so over the years, there's lessons. I don't know if there's a single data source. Yeah, I think you have to keep your head on a swivel a little bit. You have to ensure you don't get overwhelmed by the noise and the day-to-day and the trade. Because there's a lot, and it's really names that jump into my mind. They're saying what I think. So you got a whole confirmation bias thing there. So I think Arjun came on your podcast, right? Yeah. Arjun's awesome, right?
Yep.
Yeah, I love it. I'm like, okay, I got it. I like it too. And so you try to get counterpoints, right? And it's a bit hard now outside of our space to get counterpoints. So data sources, we sort of try to look at things that other people look at as well. And, we anchor it on our view. And maybe as a final point, just on our process, our price of oil is X, and we don't make any decision particularly based on our price of oil, because that whole scenario analysis, and you have to be able to withstand volatility. I feel pretty comfortable building strategy around a 5-year type number. And man, there's going to be ups and downs around that for sure, I think.
August 25th, 2006, Enerplus was around $60 a share. This is before your time, but fast forward to April 17, 2020, it was around $2 a share. That was a big ride. The question is, How do you structure the company going forward to ensure investors that their capital is safe to prevent that roller coaster, so to speak, maybe like a CNRL where investors know that things are safe?
With the benefit of hindsight, I knew that 60 didn't make any sense. Like I knew it. So here's some math for you. When we were 60, we had $1 billion of cash flow, $9 billion valuation. Our capital program was $300 million, and we had an $800 million dividend. So you don't need to be a really sophisticated investor to, that maybe isn't super sustainable. Oh, and just to make it better, we had really substandard assets. And so that didn't make any sense. $2 made no sense whatsoever. So to your question though, I was in a board meeting the other day and we've got a really great board. One of our board members is former CFO of ConocoPhillips. And I'm talking about how I see future a little differently than the last 10 or 20 years. And he goes, so you're just saying it's going to be different this time? A little gleam in his eye. I go, yeah, a little bit. So tell me when we've had a time in our space where the focus has been so acute on sustainability of businesses and de-risking them. It hasn't happened. So let's just talk debt, balance sheets. I think we're going to zero, although, last couple of quarters, debt's ticked up a little bit, but wherever you think we're going, unless you're really bearish on the commodities, I think most companies get to debt free. And then they either return more to shareholders or they start to build a little bit of cash. But regardless, the risk profile on the next down market when leverage is different is just dramatically different. Talking to fund managers, and the funds aren't there yet. The generalists aren't there yet. We've gone from 1.5% weighting on the S&P or something really, so S&P used to be 15% energy, right? And then it got to 1. Doesn't matter. Uninvestable. It's a sunset industry. And now we're to 4.5 or 5. Okay. So something's going on there, right? I think the key for it to continue beyond just to strengthen the commodities and those sorts of things is less volatility of stock ownership. And I think we're on a path to do it. I just think there's going to be floors that are different than they were before. And then we'll see if that happens. And if that does happen, and we're certainly as an industry playing our part in that. If that happens, I think shareholders will come back in and they'll see it. But yeah, it was adrenaline to the bad, uninvestable. Yeah. I mean, if I don't know if Nuttall got into it when he was on your show, but if you really work your way through the volatility his fund saw, everything's wonderful now. But there was moments there, right? It was hard. Yeah, it was very hard.
Another lawyer, Mr. Murray Edwards, the king of capital allocation. Perhaps that was a strategy he took a long time ago, 20, 30 years ago. Do you look towards someone like him in terms of that strategy nowadays with a sustainable business?
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
he's been doing that for 30 years.
Yeah, at least. There are some wonderful examples of companies. We talk about CNRL, there is the flagship. I don't want to leave anyone else behind, but I think consistency throughout the whole piece. He didn't time everything right. Like he got pretty aggressive on gas a little early, but it didn't matter. Because he took shots, nothing that exposed the company. They've been a global poster child for capital allocation and execution as well. Not everyone can employ exactly the same strategy. When Mike was building Tourmaline up, there was moments he was able to do things that not everyone could have got away with. And I don't mean that in a weird way. It's just he had trust, and he had built a track record where he was pretty unique in that, where people trusted him to lean into stuff a little bit. Not everyone has that luxury, but yeah, CNRL has been pretty special for sure.
The corporate graveyard. Do you ever look to people who didn't succeed or the companies in the graveyard, so to speak, to, like we said, avoid what not to do in corporate strategy?
All the time. All the time. All these things matter, right? As I think about as CEO, some of the things that happened in that, when I was on SVP and those 10 years ago, 15 years ago, those were really because you had to make decisions, you had accountability for things, right? And so at that point in 2012, sort of 12 and 13, just before I became CEO, we were watching what's going on in North Dakota. And one of the reasons not everyone follows the Bakken anymore, there's not as many companies, but it was also because there was a lot of train wrecks, And what you saw were the shale oil in the U.S. started in the Bakken, right? So that's where we technically cracked the nut on how to actually unlock shale oil versus shale gas. And so it was flying and the stocks were doing great. And then there were all these companies that were aggressively drilling. We didn't understand it. Like, I'll just give you a little anecdote. Like in our sort of footprint where we operated, on our acres, we had 5 rigs running, spending $2 million a day, which felt like a lot of money. And we had, if you looked at our sort of competitors in the area on that same footprint, they were running 5 times the rig count, 25 times. And most of them went bankrupt.
Right.
And most of them, so EOG and Enerplus, I think we can prove this, for years had the best well results in North Dakota in our local area. I mean, it changes geographically, but in our area, we had the best. And that was very simply EOG changed the completion design. We saw it really early. It was, everyone believed that they had made a mistake. So we started testing it, but we were going slow enough that we had time to adopt. When everyone else, most other people figured out this is the better way to go about it. They had drilled through most of their inventory. And so, having an ability to watch and maybe the confidence to do something a little bit different certainly, paid off for us.
In terms of your career, do you remember crossroads when you look back on things, when the doors kind of opened up and things started to go really well in hindsight?
Yeah, like I'm a government employee, right? I've been here 23 years. It was just bizarre. I remember like year 2, I was senior enough to be in a meeting where we were talking about compensation structures. And my CEO at the time was talking, or I don't know, somebody was talking about a pension. I can't actually remember what Gord said, but someone was talking about putting a pension in place because if you did it, and I was like, oh, come on. Like, what are you talking about? Pensions? We're not, no one's like, let's make some money here. So crossroads. I don't know. Yeah, there's been moments, left Enron to go join a biotech company for a while, which was a real thing, but it didn't feel that heroic on some respects. I'll tell you, like a lot of people will have said to me, wow, that was a big call, stopping being a lawyer after all that time, after all that training. And I left as a second-year associate, so I trained, I don't know, that's 5 years of your life. It didn't feel heroic because I didn't like what I was doing. I really didn't like what I was doing. And you're not making that much money at that stage of the game. And, we didn't have kids yet and those sorts of things, which made it easier. Yeah, there's been moments in the career where, okay, here's something pretty different. The CEO thing was the biggest change, way more than I appreciated, candidly, which is maybe a little weird, sort of watching what happened on the home front earlier, but I didn't get it. And people, I guess I could have said, here's what people will say, but in my heart of hearts, I didn't feel it would be that different. And it was quite different. Maybe ask me when I'm 65.
Yeah.
We'll see what the next 10 years looks like.
You're not that old. Yeah. You've been CEO for roughly 10 years, more or less?
Yeah, we're, I think, year 11. So
some CEOs are good at sitting in meetings, giving PowerPoints, but when they get appointed CEO, they don't last long. And perhaps the skills that led them to that position aren't robust. How come you've been able to manage as a successful CEO for so long?
I've been very, very fortunate. I've had lots of mentors, lots of support. I think I listened reasonably well. I was around a lot of CEOs, and I tell you, I had a lot. And I don't think I came across as sort of weird talking about yourself this way, but I don't think I came across as threatening. Like I'd listen to people and you could tell me stuff, and I don't think I've ever yelled at work ever. Mm-hmm. Save that for home and my kids and stuff. Right? Yeah. And so that helped. Part of my job before that, there was actually a fair amount of investing. We founded a lot of companies at Enron, and we sort of kept doing that for a long time. So I had a lot of board experience far before I was qualified for it. But I got to watch, and you could see the pitfalls. They weren't all the same, and people changed in the CEO job. So if you like all of the things with it, it is awesome. Like if you don't like speaking in public on occasion, or you're not, there's things that it wouldn't work for everybody, and there's an intensity to it, but it's awesome. If you have a chance to be CEO, figure out what it is, but it's pretty good stuff. But it can change you You get blamed for things you didn't really do. You are given credit for things you didn't really do. And, I've seen friends and colleagues, who sort of didn't continue to do the things that made them successful, in part as a sort of a protective shield around some of the parts of the job. But for Calgary, I think it's been interesting. The last 10, 15 years, there's been a new group of CEOs who've come up, and there's been a lot of success in a really trying time. Like there's some really good examples of really good leaders, but I think, Fortune 5 CEOs, the average tenure is 4 years or 5 years. Like there's a lot of volatility in the market, and, sometimes you got to change the coach out. It's hard on boards. So
favorite memory at this Haskayne School of Business?
Favorite memory. We had fun at Haskayne.
Yeah.
I had a lot of fun.
I also went there.
It was lifelong friends. This weekend, we had an annual golf game, and 3 of the guys in the foursome, I loved it. We had a lot of fun there. It wasn't the most efficient use of time because we had such a good group of friends, and there was so much group work that there were so many late nights that didn't need to be late nights. Yeah. But yeah, no, I loved it there, and great friends that have sustained to this day.
Advice to a young person in the energy industry.
I have 4 children, 21-year-old twin boys. So far, no one's asked career advice. I don't know if it'll ever happen.
Maybe that's a good thing.
I think it's okay. Yeah. Like if asked, I guess there'd be a few things. I guess a question people might have: do you think there could be a future there? I think it's going to look wonderful. So this isn't an energy comment. This is a demographic, the world's aging comment, that we've got a labor skills issue broadly. And it's going to be acute, and it's going to grow. And I think our industry is, with like a lot of sort of industries that are considered mature, is going to be right at the front of it. So I think, as you think about places where you can have an impact as a young professional with an incredible technical overlay, be it technology, and like it's everywhere to do cool stuff. So I think there's going to be opportunity. There's a whole bunch of old farts like me in middle management. Like people haven't come into it. So people are going to be moving, and there's going to be opportunity there. Depending who you're speaking with, that young person either thinks working in the fossil fuel industry is evil or is just sort of gross. They haven't really thought about it. And my advice to them would be to call me or call people who know. And if you're open-minded and are interested in learning whether your perspectives are correct, I think we can tell a story and share information that might cause you to not think you're doing immoral work, to think there's actually this. I don't even know the words. I think working in the oil and gas business today is one of the more moral things you can do if you want to work for a for-profit. And it's even more important when you've got people outside of the space who are vilifying it for reasons that are a bit hard for me to understand. And I think we can refute them with facts. So I'm seeing more and more balance come into the conversation, in places. And so, our experience for young people who haven't had a lot of exposure, who then get a little bit of exposure, through scholarships or this, or getting on and go, whoa, this is not what I thought. The environmental footprint of these operations is minuscule. The focus on community and sustainability is exceptional and getting better. So I think there's amazing opportunity. I think there's an opportunity anyway. And so anyway, beyond energy, don't sell your life. Like, do things that are fun. Do things that you enjoy. Life is way too short. I have lots of friends who are lawyers who are great and love it. I wasn't one of those people. And so I didn't stay very long, and I haven't had 1 second of regret. So yeah, associate yourself with people who are going to test you and, give you opportunities. I think it's good to be outside of your comfort zone on occasion, and maybe manage stress along the way is pretty good too.
Go to the mountains.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like I think before we started, you talked about busy people and having time, and, I'll close with my dad. So busy person, running like all this, he was always there for us. He coached. and so and he was there. We didn't have holidays canceled. In 1986, he convinced us the price of oil is zero. And, I don't know what our financial situation was at home. He did convince us that instead of going to the beach, a tour of Swift Current and looking at the old forts was going to be excellent. So there was a bit of that, but he was around. And when I was fortunate to get this job, young children said, okay, here's the deal. I'm not working 90 hours a week. It's not going to happen sometimes, right? You work when you need to work and you make yourself available. And, so the cost for me is I'm always on. The phone's on, I'm always on. It's very hard for it to be turned off. But I don't do things that I don't want to do that aren't in our shareholders' interest because, you got to find balance in your life.
Well, that's a great conversation. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. We can wrap it up there.
All right. We'll call it a wrap. Thanks.
That's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you heard, check out rosebros.ca, where we will have upcoming shows. Until next time, happy coffee drinking.